You're listening to a recording of day 2 of our Fundraising Tech Expo, held on the 5th of May 2021. Today we'll be going over generational shifts in fundraising, and it will be hosted by Alex Jivov of Hopeful Inc. Alexander Jivov is CEO and co-founder of Hopeful Inc., one of the top 100 global analytics startups of 2020. That is the first social fintech platform enabling nonprofits and charities to monetize their social media followers, specifically for fundraising, while giving them visibility on why donors are engaging through a proprietary storytelling AI dashboard. He's a salesperson, digital marketer, full-stack web developer, chef, and published author. A true believer in constant personal development, with a unique and diverse set of skills that he leverages to empower social impact all over the globe.
Always. And for day 2 today, I'm going to be talking about the generational shift in fundraising and how to make sure that you as a fundraiser are best set up for success in terms of making sure the younger generation is engaged and involved, and most importantly, donating to the causes that you believe in. I'm joined today by Pablita Thomas. She is the executive director of the British Columbia Hospice and Palliative Care Association, and she's going to be volunteering her time to speak a little bit about the challenges the association faced in leveraging social media and how Hopeful has helped them. I'll make sure to let her have some time to go through her introduction. So let's get started. So in terms of the agenda today, we're going to be talking about a number of different things, both how to focus on the generational shift in fundraising, but also the overall landscape in digital giving as it exists today and where it's going. In terms of how we're going to be progressing through this, so we'll start off with some introductions. We'll focus on what's the issue with fundraising today. Where are the difficulties really lying in how fundraisers of today are engaging on social media and online giving, why it's important to really recognize the shifts that are happening in donation patterns, how the millennial donor and the younger donor generation is specifically engaging with causes they believe in, and then focusing on social media. We'll talk a little bit about why social media is going to be one of the most important aspects of your fundraising and digital giving strategy for years to come, and especially given the rise of mobile and how that relates to social media, touching on that as well. And then in this final half, I'm going to be turning it over to Pablita to speak to their experiences on the association side, and then giving some next step suggestions. As Alex mentioned, everything is going to be recorded today, and our contact information is available as well if there's any questions. So a little bit about myself to kick off. So I'm Alex Jivov. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Hopeful Inc. Hopeful is a Toronto-founded and based startup that just recently graduated from the UC Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator. We are also a Ryerson DMZ alumni company, and we are the first social fund tech fundraising technology platform that really allows nonprofits and charities to not only monetize their social media followers for donations, but really let them see what is it about their stories and their storytelling that's leading people to not just hit the like button, but to donate and make that a repeatable process. Being able to use advanced technologies like AI to see, is it certain parts of your imagery, your videos, hashtags, even the way that you're writing your captions, it's actually leading people to donate for the first time, donate that extra dollar and make that a repeatable and scalable process. I myself am Toronto born and raised. The storytelling aspect has been a very deep part of my life. I'm an ex-journalist, was previously at the National Post, first as a city reporter in Toronto, and then as a national reporter. I then moved over to Politico, which is one of the largest US think tank journals in the world, and then really focused on my software as a service experience, building teams within the technology world, both in restaurants and nonprofits. I'm a pro bono web developer, originally working with nonprofits on their web development, marketing, and sales. I currently sit on the board of 2 amazing nonprofit organizations in Toronto. And a fun fact about myself, I am also a published cookbook author and was on MasterChef a few years ago. So I see Helen has included a fun fact there, but that's a little bit about me. Now for the star of the show, Pablita, do you want to take it away?
I love that star of the show. Good morning, everyone. It is 8:15 a.m. in BC, so I am extremely pleased to to be presenting today. So like Alex said, my name is Pablita Thomas. I am the ED over at the BC Hospice Palliative Care Association. For some that may not know about the organization, really quickly, we are a nonprofit public membership organization that provides advocacy, information, and education training for those that are in the hospice, which is end of life care and palliative care realm in BC and also in the Yukon. Just a quick tidbits about myself. I am raised in Toronto, but I am born in Guadeloupe, a small French island in the Caribbean, and my father is Dominican, so that is where the French, Latin, Caribbean background comes into play. A lot of people, some of my partners call me that I am a nonprofit fixer. It just happens to be that every time I get into a nonprofit, they are going through a huge transition, and I just like being there to help them through that transition process. I've worked in 3 separate nonprofit organizations in Alberta and BC. I sit as a advisory council director for the Vantage Point, which is a nonprofit provincial organization in BC that represents all of the nonprofit and charities in the province. A lot of my background is on research and policy in the provincial government in Ontario, and then moving out west because that is where we wanted to be, my family and I. I've worked more in the nonprofit realm. The one thing that I would like to say that I am the most proud of in terms of my achievements are my 2 daughters who are 5 and 6, who I swear they're 15 and 16. They are with me with my partner, and we live on Vancouver Island. And like the slide says, I am deeply infatuated with the Japanese culture, their food, their historics, everything. A little fun fact about me is I like to plan and organize in terms of what I do when it comes to work, but my personal life, not even close. So I always like to say the story that when I got married with my partner, I told both sides of my family, don't want anything to do with it. All I care about is that there is no chocolate cake. I figure I'm chocolate enough. I don't want any more chocolate cake. I just want a nice wedding. And they were able to organize everything. I just showed up, my dress, everything was chosen. Way to go. But yeah, I'm a laid back kind of person, like to get work done. And this is what really brought me my attraction to Hopeful Inc. in terms of their need and want to change the way that nonprofits fundraise. So we'll talk about that later on in the presentation.
Absolutely. And one thing to add for everyone, for Pablita, she has been an absolute awesome partner to work with. BCH, PCA, and Pablita have been with us almost right after we officially launched Hopeful Inc.'s product into the open market. They've been one of the biggest champions of our development. So Pablita is definitely the nonprofit fixer, and it's great to work with.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, in terms of, I touched on all of this in terms of the initial introduction, but just to give you a little bit more flavor. So we are very much so focused on the partnerships aspect of the nonprofit space as well. In terms of the team at Hopeful, we're a team of about 10 people, primarily based in Toronto, but also around the world, the UK and India as well. We've got 200 clients in North America, and we are incubated within the Blackbud Social Good Startup Program. So if you or your organization does work with Blackbud, we are a full integration partner with them, as well as Donor Perfect. Silent Partner Software is also near and dear to our hearts. And I would say with Wisely, they are really our sister company in a lot of ways. Wes and I have had a lot of opportunities to work together. It's been almost 2 years now of working and building these companies together. And then in terms of other major partners, of course, British Columbia Hospice and Palliative Care, one of our #1 and largest partners, and most recently, some of the largest members of that association, including the Canuck Place Children's Hospital, which is one of the official partners of the Vancouver Canucks. And we are continuing to expand rapidly as well. So that's just a little bit more flavor about Hopeful and who we are. But now let's get into the meat of things. So the problem that originally myself and then our team really recognized, both working directly within small nonprofits, but then seeing the ecosystem as a whole, is that a lot of the fundraising realm right now has really been focused on the older generation, generally have more financial capability, but now on the decline just as a natural part of time. Being able to focus on them in much more traditional marketing methods. So fundraising through events, which as a result of COVID-19 now is largely impossible, email, direct mail, peer-to-peer fundraising, all very valid and very important tactics. But now a very important shift has started to happen in terms of how donors, especially millennials such as myself, who are now becoming financially independent, are very much so motivated to give. But the way they are actually finding causes they believe in is significantly different. It's causing a huge shift in how people are recognizing which causes they want to donate to. Now, despite this shift really occurring in the last 6 or so years and moving much more into the online realm, moving much more into social media, nonprofits and charities, and even to some extent the higher education space, have really been struggling to properly connect with these younger donors. The three primary issues of that is A, technology. For a large part of the space until Hopeful and Wisely and these kinds of companies came around is that they were only for-profit tools to use social media, to use online options in order to engage with younger donors available. There's nothing purpose-built for the nonprofit space. And that created a large gap in terms of what was possible from a budgetary perspective, but also providing what information was needed for the nonprofit fundraisers to actually get engaged with their donors. Now, with that disconnect, time, of course, we're always strapped for time, especially with everything that's happening with COVID-19. It's a constant battle to have enough time in the day to accomplish everything that you want to accomplish. And with the lack of these tools available to properly manage time as it relates to fundraising, it really created a slowdown in adapting to this shift. Now, finally, from a knowledge perspective, the really big thing is that, and Pablito will speak to this a bit more, generally speaking, fundraisers and volunteers are now starting to become a bit more on the older side, run by the older generation, and there is less familiarity there in how to use social media effectively, because it's something that's very new, that's something that has only been around for about a decade at this point. It's very important that it's a constant education that needs to happen with all of these new technology companies purpose built to the impact and nonprofit space that are not only helping you connect with your younger donors, but letting you know why. How can you do this repeatedly? How can you do this on your own? How can you be innovative? Those kinds of constraints are something we're trying to address and Wisely is trying to address in the space as well. Because if you don't have the knowledge, the technology is irrelevant because you really need to be agile and know how to function on your own in these kinds of environments. But let's highlight a little bit in terms of what this looks like from a generational perspective. So to give some flavor, Gen Z, which is ages 18 to 24, has the second highest rate of giving overall, followed by Gen X, so 35 to 54, and then the baby boomer generation from there. So as you can see, the youngest generation is now becoming the most active in what they're giving to, and they are giving frequently. And especially on all of these metrics, for example, Gen Z, Gen X, and the millennial generation are between 40 to 50% of the entire generation is enrolled into a monthly giving program of some kind. Especially during COVID-19, the amount of millennials and younger donors who provided monetary assistance at least once to a nonprofit organization within their area is absolutely staggering. 74% of millennials versus 54% of the baby boomer generation. That is a huge shift in potential new donors that can be captured for the future. And it's very important to focus on these two younger generations as they come online. As this generation starts aging, as their finances grow, they will very easily start moving into your major gift donors, reliable repeat donors, and really make sure that they are setting you and your organization up for sustainability and success in the future. And these trends are trends that are still continuing to develop. COVID-19 is still with us. People are getting more used to being online, still being used to being fully remote. That means more time to identify potential causes, frankly, more time on social media and places where you can capture their attention, and more time to really dig into why is it that they're giving, why they give. From a personal perspective, what is it they're interested in and what is it that they're engaging with? Now, I've already kind of talked about that millennials are generous givers. So 84% of millennials give to charity on a regular basis. 63% of them will give extra to offset processing costs. This is a very important metrics to focus on because this is essentially, for all intents and purposes, a lot of the bottom line that's coming off of your donations are caused by processing fees. With 63% of the younger generation willing to give that extra dollar, $2 to offset your processing costs, the ratio of donations to administrative costs that are coming in is now going to be radically shifting. So you'll have much more bang for your buck from each donation that's coming in. Now, not only are they willing to offer these kinds of incentives from donations in terms of offsetting the processing costs, giving on a regular and monthly basis, but they're also going to be, as all millennials are, my phone's in my pocket right now, is being on their phones constantly to receive information. 30%, a third of the entire millennial generation prefer to donate via text or apps. This is a very huge opportunity as a fundraiser because you can essentially grow not only a repeated giving program with them very easily. All that really needs to be required is a proper texting strategy or even building a fairly low cost app, the costs of which go down every single year. But you can actually build an organic relationship with them. It's much more easy to simply strike up a text conversation with a potential donor than it was in the past. And being able to simply grow those relationships, again, these donors are ones that if you capture them and you capture them reliably, you have them from the initial repeat donor all the way through major gifts if you have them properly maintained throughout their lifetime as a potential donor. And then just to reinforce that, 23% prefer to give online. So being able to make sure that not only are you shored up on all the ways that they are online, so social media, your website, texting, apps, but being able to make sure that there's a process in place to manage if they come into one part of your digital strategy, they see an email, they go on your website, how can you re-engage them somewhere else online? There's no longer one singular portal for a potential donor to come in. They can now come in at any single point in time from anywhere on the internet, and you never know how they find you. They could be down a black hole in Wikipedia and find you. Then you have to be able to be always ready to engage them that way. That being said, these are not blind donors. These are donors who, more than ever before, want to see where exactly their money is coming from. The number one reason for millennial attrition is being unaware of the impact of their donations. These are experiments we have personally run through Hopeful of being able to essentially do a blind reach out through social media and text to donate to a potential cause, and then sending out a potential impact report along with the initial ask for fundraising. The actual efficacy is about 66% higher on getting a first-time donation when you actually provide distinct impact assessments of what each dollar is going to, why, and what is the underlying administrative cost of the association of that. 22% of millennials like to see nonprofit impact reports. These are reports that do not have to be very cut and dry. You can make them fun. You can make them very imagery based. If anyone is curious, there's a wonderful organization in Toronto called the Regent Park School of Music that every year gives out very colorful and exciting pamphlets of their impact reports. They provide musical education to underserved communities and children. Being able to read those impact reports are very informative, but it's also not a slog. It's very easy to see, okay, I donated $20, that bought a guitar for a young child who wants to learn the guitar, and that immediately captures my attention there. Now, it goes farther. Millennials now, especially primarily college-educated ones, will start digging further, looking into financial reports, making sure that the administrative ratio of what's going on from an admin perspective and a donation perspective is in the proper range, so you're not overspending and all their dollars are actually going towards impact. And then finally, and most importantly, they will cross-compare that to your social media. Are you active on social? Are you engaging with other organizations in the community? Are you growing things like that? And it's very important to be able to actually grow things like that from a perspective of why is it that you need the money to make an impact and how you can actually make that happen. So as a result of that, really take away that millennials want to know their gifts matter overall. Now, this is a very good quote that was done by Bilal Tajildeen from the Connecticut Council for Philanthropy. I don't see this as a generation that wants to write a check and be done with it. They want to see how their donation is making an impact and affecting real change. I'm really harping on this because it is the most critical part of the generational shift. More than ever before, you are not giving money specifically as a one and done donation. You're getting money as an informed choice by a potential donor. And if you prove that efficacy to them, then that is why they will keep coming back to you. So how can you engage with this then? Getting a little bit more into the practical things. So in terms of the younger generation, the virality of social media is your friend. Being able to push out things and encourage the sharing of them is going to be the most important part to your digital strategy. Nowadays, you do not need professional camera work. You do not need to hire videographers to put out effective content about your organization. You need a cell phone and you need to have people. You can have yourself share videos of things that you're putting on, initiatives, talk about why the cause is important to you. It can be a 2-minute video that you post on TikTok. And if that gets picked up by several thousand people, your donor base is already set to go from there. Being able to share the stories of your impact, going back to what I was saying previously, is going to be very, very important. And being able to share stories of the different kinds of impacts your donations are having is going to be incredibly important. So encouraging sharing, making sure you're putting out content consistently and reliably. Content quality matters significantly less on social media and online than the consistency of content. That's a very important point to make. And then being able to encourage shared events and experiences. So is there something you can do to put on virtual events? Is there something that you can do to go live on Instagram and talk about with your potential potential people that you're impacting of, hey, this is what the impact the organization had on myself. This is why people should give. Can anyone else share those stories? Making sure that's going to a wider audiences, having those conversations is going to be one of the most important things here. And that's going to be, one of the most critical things to focus on, especially during COVID-19. One thing I'd really love everyone to think about is how can you partner with local businesses in order to make sure they have a presence as well within your organization. Encourage people to start buying from those local businesses while also supporting your organization at the same time. That's going to be one of the most critical things you can do because A, it'll help you grow your local community. It buys significant goodwill for these local businesses that need to be supported more than ever during this time as well. And then it's also very critical that it creates essentially a de facto social enterprise. A rising tide lifts all ships, and being able to have this ongoing dialogue between the younger donor, the local coffee shop down the street they love, and your organization is the perfect way to keep them engaged for a very, very long time. And then, of course, on the flip side, partnering with corporations that are favored by millennials. I'm currently in New York right now with family. There's a Soul Cycle on every single block, Orange Theory Fitness. Any one of the corporations that are philanthropic are really focused on corporate social responsibility, that love to partner with effective organizations that are having an impact in their local communities or around the world. Partnering with them is one of the easiest ways to get recognition and also to grow your social media base as well. Social media is the thing I'm focusing on here because it is the most important to focus it on how big of an opportunity it is. 55% of people who engage with nonprofits on social media end up taking some sort of action. 55%. That is an unheard of conversion metric in anything in the digital marketing or e-commerce world. Being able to take any kind of action is something that with the proper tools you can take action on. Is it they just hit the like button? Okay, why? Are you getting a lot of likes on a certain post? What is the intelligence from that? That is something that Hopeful specifically helps on, shameless plug. But being able to focus on how important that is key. 59% donate money and 53% volunteer. This is a captive audience who's going to be sitting on your Instagram, sitting on Facebook, sitting on Twitter, sitting on TikTok. God knows I know with all my friends, These are people who are going to be there regardless. You get in front of them, you get in front of them reliably, they will do something to support you if you do it properly. However, one of the biggest things that needs to be done is that a major chunk of nonprofits aren't fundraising through social media. At most, it's posting for the sake of posting without reliably focusing on what your ROI is. And it's also not really focusing on fundraising. There's a really not a true perception within the nonprofit space that social media is a fundraising tool when it really is. Only 55% are fundraising on Facebook, Facebook being the most popular tool for fundraising in social media right now. Again, much more catered to the older generation now. Only 29% on Instagram. An important metric to think about, because 76% of nonprofits and charities as of earlier this year said that imagery and videos are much more effective tools for fundraising than traditional email or text. So considering Instagram is all video and imagery, something to think about there. And then in terms of fundraising statistics, there's not even ones available for LinkedIn and Twitter. 56% have used LinkedIn, 86% of nonprofits have used Twitter, but there's not even any fundraising being done. And there's hundreds of millions of people concurrently using these platforms. So this is a huge, huge donor base that is being sat on and isn't being properly leveraged. And incorporating all social media, not just focusing on a Facebook, not just using one platform, is how you not only have a multi-tier strategy in donations, it's how you specifically make sure that you have every possible demographic engaged with you at once. And it's also how to make sure that your messaging can be consistent and change as you receive responses across all of your channels on what's effective and what's not. So on one of the last points here is, where's the money coming from? So online monthly giving revenue grew by about 40% last year as recurring donation options become increasingly popular. The younger generation is very fond of recurring fire and forget monthly giving programs, as I mentioned earlier. And more and more so, they are making a shift from a bank or a wire transfer to much more of a PayPal, much more of a text to give and mobile money strategy. I very much so expect that the text to give and mobile money aspects, especially with the rise of, say, things like cryptocurrency, will increase significantly. Mail and post decreasing significantly over the next several years. But one of the key things to take away here is being sure that you can have a reasonable strategy to get them engaged in a monthly giving program so that they are much more manageable. There's a good process in place, and most importantly, you save time, because there is a cost of acquisition involved on your donors, and this is the easiest way to lower that to as close to zero as possible. Finally, on the phones front, this is very important to think about, because I know I've been talking about social media, we've touched on text, but the phone does everything these days. So you can be able to focus on mobile first, not worry about social media, not worry about your website, and you're still going to find success here. Online donation pages had an average conversion rate of 8% on mobile devices in 2019. The number of transactions completed through mobile devices increased by 50%. So being able to be right where a person is, because they're on their phone all the time, is going to be absolutely critical. And the number of donations that are being completed outside of the phones is decreasing. So if you aren't focused on mobile first, your pool of donors and donations is going to start naturally shrinking as this generational shift happens. And most importantly, half of all nonprofit website traffic came from mobile and tablet users. If you haven't checked on your website and if it's mobile friendly in a while, I would say one of the main takeaways on this presentation is to just jump on your phone and check if that's the case, because one of the biggest turnoffs for a potential donor is a website that is not built for a mobile first user. And mobile gives more than the desktop. An average mobile user donates about $70. A tablet user gives $96. These are not insignificant gifts. These are not insignificant gifts whatsoever. So making sure that you are where they are on their phone at any given time. Social media is the example, but doesn't have to be, is going to be one of the last takeaway points that I want to give here. But now I'd love to turn it over to Pablita to speak a little bit about her experience with Hopeful and a little bit of the overall landscape the association found themselves in when we connected.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for that, Alex. I just want to just start off by first just acknowledging the significance and the importance in the nonprofit and community nonprofits and charity sector. I just want to start off by just highlighting the economic impact that we had during last year in 2020. So when we look at the nonprofit, this is from Stats Canada, nonprofit statistics on the economy GDP. Nonprofits in 2020 had an overall increase of 2.3%. It was the highest contributor to the Canadian economic system during 2020. When you compare it to the other sectors, they were at minus 5.4%. So I just want to start off by saying how important are what contributes to that is the donationship, the volunteerism force, and just the overall social impact that nonprofits provide, that really are a force to reckon with when we come to economic support within our nation. So in saying that, I really want to really highlight what that looks like. Volunteerism and being able to donate and attract donations are the two that really build for this impact, that really feeds into this impact, these numbers that I'm giving you here. So just to understand our association, we're a provincial organization that is the united voice for hospice palliative care in both the territory of Yukon and the province of BC. And all of our hospices are nonprofits and charities. So they depend on volunteerism and they also depend on donations. It's extremely important. Just to give you an idea, in BC, hospice societies are funded at 20%, and 80% is all based on community support, volunteer engagement, and donations. And all of their services that they provide to the community are free of cost. So when we look at that, the average, when we looked at the 2020 numbers last year, all of the hospices, there are 71 hospices in BC and 2 in the Yukon territories, they were able to fundraise $44 million in comparison to the 16 million that they received from government funding, while still being able to provide the services that they did during this pandemic. And this is really important to really highlight, because that was technically 10 million more than the previous years in 2019. And how they did that is they really switched from their face-to-face donationship to virtual. And that was a huge shift, because in hospice palliative care, the majority of the volunteer force are the average age of 62 years. They have a very long tenure, one of the longest in the volunteer sector at 8 years. But at the same time, when we did a survey of our members, only 50% of them felt that they were virtually ready to do that shift and felt that their services could be adequately provided virtually. Where the strength really came was the resilience in terms of converting from face-to-face to virtual donation. But a lot of our hospices really didn't know how to do that transition. And working through social media was the biggest piece. When we started last year in September, only half of our membership actually had a social media platform. Some of them had Facebook, some of them had websites, none of them had TikTok or Instagram. So there was a huge shift in really not only the shift, but educating on what social media really is about and how they can engage new and ongoing donations. And also with the ultimate goal of engaging a younger generation, because that has been the hardest part in hospice palliative care for the past decade, is how do we engage in a younger generation. So what we've been able to see in working with Hopeful is that we've seen that there's been a shift in the engagement of hospices wanting to leverage their social media, not only to fundraise and to provide donations, but also for awareness and attracting a younger generation that they've been missing for the past 10 years in engaging. And what we've been able to see is that there's been conversations about, what does a framework for engaging a younger generation look like? What does that look like in terms of social media for donation? What does it mean or look like for volunteering? So some of the things that we really focused on is really building a strategy And with the help of Hopeful, we've been able to really identify on a provincial level where some of those gaps may be so that we can support our members. So one of the things that we really noticed, and this spoke to what Alex spoke about before, is that really having social media ads that really engage the younger generation, but also allows them to envision themselves in that particular environment. So, for example, yes, the younger generation may like or does have a high percentage of donations, but if they can't envision their donation making a change or envision themselves as being a volunteer, then there's no real connection. So the connection was important. So those were things that we were talking with our members about. Another thing as well is building capacity. It's one thing to engage in a younger generation for donations, but how do you engage them to become volunteers? And so engaging them in opportunities that speaks to their development in terms of, like I spoke about, we have a long tenure in our volunteers, but younger generations may not be able to commit to that. So how do you engage them in a way, instead of saying you want 1 or 2 years of recurrent donation or volunteer systems, how do you split that up to maybe 3 months during the summer or seasonal, so that attracts them into becoming more into your volunteer force and also donating? Because the one thing that we've noticed is that 80% of our volunteers also donate. So if we can attract younger generations to volunteer, they will also donate and be able to spread the word. So these are things that we're really starting to learn on a provincial level and definitely on a community level with our societies. Another thing that we also identified in terms of how to attract the younger generations for both donations and volunteer engagement, because those are the two big issues within the hospice palliative care community on a national level, but specifically to BC, is how do you empower them to be involved in decision making on governance levels for end of life and hospice care, but also community levels as well, so that they feel that they are also equal partners in not only donations, but also in the decision making of how the healthcare system and their community organizations support their community. And on a provincial level, we're looking at getting a youth director to help us strategize on that. But what we've noticed is that when we're looking at the Hopeful platform to look at where the demographics are within our community of a younger generation, or of social media posts that have a lot of attractions, we do see them more so a higher percentage of the ones that have to do with grief, bereavement, and that have to do with children's grief and bereavement, which makes sense because a younger person is not really looking at death and dying. That's not part of their vocabulary right now. But grief, bereavement, in light of COVID and even pre-COVID, is something that everyone can really identify with. So I think on a provincial level, we've been able to use Hopeful to strategize on how we can engage a younger generation, not only for donation, but also for increasing our volunteer force. And on a community level, the hospices have been able to right now strategize and look at how they can implement a young generational framework in the same capacity. So I think for that, if anybody has any questions on that, I can definitely answer after our presentation. But it's definitely important to engage the younger generation, not only in, like I said, in terms of donation, but how really empowering them to be involved so that they can be equal contributors. That is what we've seen as a success to us.
And that's an awesome rundown, Fabrita. I would say, if you could, perhaps if we could touch on when we were first engaged in our first conversations, even leveraging Twitter to not necessarily for the younger donors, but engaging with government and other funding sources. If you could speak a little bit about how social media can be used in those realms, that would be great.
Yeah. So that's actually a really good point. So last year in the winter, we had put out a week-long social media post on grief and bereavement because it was National Children's Grief Week. And what we wanted to do is we realized that for the health sector, that is health and social sector, the government officials loved Twitter. And we really wanted to not only bring the relevance of hospice palliative care, but educate our government and policy decision makers on what hospice palliative care truly is about. And 82% of the services that our hospice societies provide is grief, bereavement, complicated grief, and counseling. That is the bulk of their work. And so what we did is we had a week-long campaign on grief and bereavement, and we were able to utilize Hopeful, the platform, to look at which grief and bereavement posts based on different platforms were getting the most impressions and attractions. And we were able to identify that our children's grief campaign surpassed by 62% and impressions of like 10,000, which we've never seen numbers of in the past. They're usually at a 1,000, 2,000 mark. But we were also able to see that Twitter was really a way that we could captivate on a lot of our government officials. So we were able to then isolate the Twitter for the last 3 days of our campaign and strategically connect with key ministerial and MP political staff and be able to engage them in Twitter. And we were able to get our grief and bereavement tweet reposted by Minister Sanjeet, which is the Minister of Defense for Canada. And that was awesome. We were so stoked because that was a personalized retweet that he did, and he has so many followers. But we were able to really isolate and focus on campaigns that were working based on looking at Hopeful in terms of looking at which platforms were getting the most engagement and being able to strategically put extra resources in a particular social media, which then rendered that retweet and engagement from a federal staff, really. So that was great.
Awesome. And then so in terms of kind of isolating certain trends, in terms of in the future with the association and given what you've talked about then, Pablita, what does kind of the ideal future look like in terms of using social? What would you like to see happen in terms of social's use for the entire association, especially individual members? What does the future hold there?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. I think on a provincial level, I really want to see our social media not only engage, but connect communities in terms of what hospice palliative care truly is about. And more of an upstream model, not always just thinking of death and dying, but thinking of grief and bereavement, and definitely in light of COVID, really looking at complicated grief, pre-mental health disorders. And I think that's important because on a provincial and community level, we need to really meet definitely the younger generation at where they're at, and they are on social media. So being able to engage our societies and train them on what each platform truly does and who they're geared to, I think will better equipped us in getting our information to more of a broader reach, but also engage those communities so that they are able to then advocate for themselves, being educated about what we've been able to put out through social media and on a timely manner as well. So that's how I really hope to use and see social media within the hospice palliative care community.
Amazing. Well, Pablita, thank you so much as always. That was a really, really good rundown, and thank you for joining us and for being such a great partner and helpful. So I see there's some questions. So we'll touch. We have just about 2 or 3 slides left. So we'll touch a little bit about what the next step looks like, and then we'll save the time that we have specifically for some questions. So going quickly in terms of the next step. So what is the next step here? So we've talked about what the donor looks like, what they would want, where they're actually where they're coming from, but how do you actually capitalize it? So there's really 3 main points that we want to focus on here. It's A, telling your stories as it relates specifically to your data. Are you collecting data? Are you actually building things out to track what the engagement is on your social media? Are you tracking where your donors are? It is absolutely critical before you start getting even on other platforms that you have the proper foundation in place in order to tell your stories in favor of what is resonating with people and what's speaking to the real messaging of your organization. What is it that's really leading people to donate what is it that's leading to that advocacy, and how do you make that a repeatable process, not on gut instinct, not posting for the sake of posting, but telling it as it's supposed to happen, backed by hard empirical evidence. And once that's in place, social intelligence, making sure that you're looking out for the nonprofit specific tools that are designed for this space by former fundraisers who know how you operate, rather than bolting on multiple different pieces of information and data sources where that really adds as a detriment. If you're using a whole collection of different tools that may not interact with each other, just so you have something, it's honestly better to go back and start using Excel, Google Sheets, and tracking those kinds of things, because otherwise it's just going to slow you down if it's not built to how you want your processes to run. Do it smart. That's what it comes down to. Social media is a place of a lot of saturation. There's 6,000 tweets a second. There's 95 million Instagram posts a second, and there's 32 Facebook posts a minute. That is a lot of data, and you have to be able to be sure that you're focusing on that correctly. And the way we always recommend it is looking at artificial intelligence. Now, given Wisely and ourselves are artificial intelligence companies, so that is our disclaimer. But artificial intelligence is a norm in the for-profit industry now, and it is something that is really not expensive to acquire anymore. AI has the potential to boost rates of profitability by an average of 38% in the US, but create a $14 trillion gross value add by 2035. And AI tools can be applicable to any part of your organization, not just fundraising. Being able to perform data analytics on your data sets, so donors, supporters, where they're coming from, individual donation amounts, patterns, milestones, comparisons between different geographic locations, event attendance, it goes on and on. And NP Engage, I saw some questions in the chat in terms of our sources. NP Engage is always an awesome source for statistics on these kinds of things, specifically as it relates to artificial intelligence. So being able to look into tools that help automate your processes is going to be incredibly important. And that's something that we always highly recommend to look at. And finally, AI-based tools help automate everything. So they help automate routine tasks. You can do it for finance, human resource operations, external comms. You don't have to throw everything out the kitchen sink all at once. It's not the saying at all, I apologize. But basically being able to start small. If you're not comfortable doing a whole conversion, that's completely fine. But if you can save yourselves 30 minutes, an hour out of each day, out of a couple of hours each week, that's money that can directly, well, that's time rather, that can be directly brought back into raising funds and being an effective fundraiser. And this is already being recognized. The use of artificial intelligence in the nonprofit space is set to grow almost 4x in the next 2 years. And I expect that number to grow even more significantly in the years prior. So it's very important to get on this trend and be ahead of the game here. And that's it. So thank you everyone so much for listening to us, for listening to Publita, and for offering your time. It's always an honor to speak with the champions who are really making a difference in the world and in the space. We're available obviously on all socials. Like Wisely, we are going to be working on putting together a private demo of Hopeful for event attendees in the next several weeks. So we'll be sending that out in the next few days. But otherwise, I did want to leave a few minutes to answer some questions. But before I do that, Wes, how are we doing on timing? You're on mute, sir.
Classic mistake. We did build in a little bit of extra time for buffer. So I know we've got a couple of questions. I think Helen's going to join us to ask those. While Helen's coming in, Publita, I have a question for you. First, thank you for being here and sharing the story of the BC Palliative Care. Social sounds like it's a big part of your strategy moving forward here. What's driving that? Is that revenue? Is it community? Is it just engagement? I'm curious as to what's the big driver of that.
The big driver of that is the lack of awareness. So I think when we look at a way of being engaged with the community, social is what makes sense. And the awareness, the lack of awareness is what really drives that. And with awareness comes everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're using the reach of social to raise the awareness within your communities. I think that's a wonderful concept.
Yeah, thank you. And I think also with COVID, it has really expedited, really has expedited that need, because the hospices have done really good, perfect, really, for the past 40 years with just having face-to-face events and making those connections in terms of knocking on people's doors, you know, connecting it with their community grocer. But now, in light of COVID, it's just not the case. So the next best thing, as some of them would say, is social media.
Yeah, I think Alex said, I'm sure you have an opinion on this as well, but I doubt there's ever been a more transformative 16, 14 months for the nonprofit sector.
Yeah.
No. Absolutely. It's right now, I've rarely seen in the technology space essentially a hard accelerator literally appear from the clouds with COVID-19 to really start accelerating these trends. And I think that it's really important to look at the results of COVID as not just the tragedy that it is, but also the opportunity that it provides. Because really, this was a time to really dig deep, take a look at how you can get set up for success, and make sure that you're really accelerating onto this trend as it itself accelerates. And I think we've been seeing really, really positive trends in that on that front too.
Do you want me to jump in and ask the questions? There's a couple questions. I'm dying to know the answers here too.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been looking at them here. So I'm more than happy if you could run through them, Wes, because I know there's both in the Q&A and the chat, there's a few.
Yeah, there's been a couple. So first off, there's a question about Facebook fundraising. Mm-hmm. And there's a group here. It's been really challenging for them because they're not seeing the results. They don't understand how well it's working. Mm-hmm. Is there tools out there? Maybe this is hopeful. Maybe it's on Facebook that help you track your success and sort of the reach and donations?
Absolutely. So Hopeful does do this. We do provide specific insights on where your donors are coming from and why Facebook was, of course, something we implemented first and foremost. To be completely blunt, I'm really not bullish on Facebook as a fundraising tool. It is very expensive if you use the Facebook fundraising inbuilt tools as well. And because of the changes Facebook does constantly integrate in terms of what insights they provide, it's inconsistent. Also, because it is the oldest of the social media platforms, I would heavily recommend against using paid ads for fundraising and to encourage fundraising on Facebook. The ROI there is just simply not there. To track donors, I would say that if you really would love to be on top of it, usually I would say a dual strategy, making sure that you're driving, you have purpose-built tools. So for example, Hopeful, again, shameless plug, I apologize. Being able to actually use a dedicated tool to monetize your donors on Facebook, but get that analytics back. So because Facebook analytics is much more business and for-profit oriented, it's not going to give you the proper donor tracking that you need. Worst case scenario, make sure that you don't use a Facebook fundraiser. You make sure you build in your Facebook pixel. So that's the capability to actually connect that to your website and drive people to your website. Then at least you'll get a sense of where they're coming from through Facebook and what Facebook's ROI is as a whole. It's a stopgap measure because it's more in the aggregate, but otherwise I would always recommend diversifying out and make sure that you can get a clear sense of what your ROI is potentially on all your social media platforms, and don't just focus on the one platform. And I hope that answered that question.
Yeah. So be diverse in your approach, and don't necessarily put all your eggs into the Facebook donation basket, I guess is what I just heard there. Yeah. One other thing that you said, a pixel, for those of you that don't know, a pixel in digital marketing is literally your best friend. It will tell you who's coming to your site. And you could then do things like remarket to them using your Google AdWords, or present different things when they come to your site. Next question. Are nonprofits actually using TikTok? And Alex, I know we've had this conversation before. This individual sees donations being made like through Venmo or tipping a homeless person $1,000, really to help share the message of like what they care about. But have you seen any nonprofits themselves have any success there?
Yeah, so I'm a big TikTok guy, as Wes knows. So I'm TikTok is right now in its infancy in terms of the advocacy space, but there are some really good success stories there. We've had a few conversations with TikTok for Good's management team about this in the last few weeks as we work on them for an integration. To give an example of success, the American Heart Association actually partnered with an influencer on TikTok for them to go live and help fundraise. From one live session that lasted about an hour, they raised about $70,000. And given that the American Heart Association is a large nonprofit, it forayed into TikTok pretty much completely blind, and that's a significant raise for an hour of the time. I would say that TikTok right now has the easiest way to become viral out of any single platform. Given how fast it's grown, you're not behind the curve. I would definitely recommend starting to put out content. But if you don't have the time to put out content on TikTok, reach out to influencers. There's so many of them. They're all over the world. And in terms of the ROI on TikTok, it basically breaks down to the highest ROI on giving from TikTok right now is the actual lives that people do. So someone goes live, they talk about the cause, people can donate directly. Donation buttons have a little bit less efficacy there. So being able to actually have a partner in the space is your number one bet. There are early success stories there. So I'm very enthusiastic about which way it's going to go. TikTok themselves are also thinking about this on a daily basis. So I definitely think it's something that nonprofit organizations can see success on. And also TikToks, you can bang out TikToks pretty quickly. When I was using the example earlier of you just need a phone and yourself, that I was thinking of TikTok in terms of creating content.
Well, I think that's going to wrap up our questions. Alex, Alita. Did I miss something?
Yeah, so I did want to make sure because there's a few questions in the chat relating to the statistics we were pulling. And I also did want to mention, so we do provide free digital consultation, both within the Hopeful tool as well as ourselves. We do have a social media toolkit that shows you how to be effective on all social. If anyone would like access to that, feel free to reach out to myself or Helen, or simply sign up for our newsletter on hopefullink.me. We put out those tips constantly. It's completely free. And in terms of the statistics, so they are slightly more weighted to the US just because of the information that we do have available to us. And they are a mix of reports from other players in the space. So for example, Salesforce, their fundraising report, which is the most recent one to come out, Fundraise is always a really good source for their digital giving report that comes out yearly. In terms of the COVID-19 raise reports that came from Classy, I believe. If anyone wants a full list of where we pulled our statistics, I'm also more than happy to share those as well. So feel free to reach out to me directly. And I think that covered all of those questions on that side. So if I missed anything, feel free to reach out to me as well. I'm an open door.
Thank you so much, Alex and Helen from Hopeful Inc., and also to Plebita Thomas from the British Columbia Hospice and Palliative Care Association, and to all Wisely staff who helped with today's webinar to make it a success. If you want to find out how you can take the guesswork out of fundraising and raise more money and get more insights into your donors, book your group demo with Wisely by clicking on the link in the description below or by visiting wisely.ai. You can also sign up for a free, no-obligation 1-month trial by going onto our website and clicking Sign Up Now. Thank you.